Welcome to this video lecture. Myself Atul Kumar, working as a assistant professor in Department of Computer Science, Rajiv Gandhi Memorial, Government College, Jogindarnagar. In this video lecture, I will discuss about entity relationship model. So, entity relationship model is a high-level conceptual data model developed to facilitate database design. So, it was first proposed by P.P. Chan in his paper Entity Relationship Model Toward a Unified View of Data, that is published in 1976. This model is widely used model for designing logical database schema, and it is a high level description of the data and relationship among the data. So ER model is also shown diagrammatically with the help of entity relationship diagrams. So what are the different features of ER model? So the first feature is very common, that is ER diagram are used for representing ER model that can be easily converted into relations in relational model. So we can easily convert ER model into a ER diagram, and these ER diagrams are very easily converted to relations in relational model. So the second feature is it is widely used for the purpose of good database design. The third important feature is it is very simple, non-technical, free of ambiguities, and easy to understand by various type of users, programmers, and designers. It also follow top-down approach to database design. This is also important feature of ER model. So next we have different terminology in ER model. The first is what is entity. So entity is a object in the real world that is distinguished from other objects. The examples of entities are some specific room, specific part, person, all are the examples of entity. The next important terminology is attribute. So attributes are the properties or characteristics of the entities. For example, we have name, we have student, and class. All are the properties of a entity student. Next important terminology is relationships. So it is basically the association between two or more entities. How the two or more entities are related to each other, this is called as relationship. Next is degree of relationships. So it is the number of entities associated with the relationship. Suppose we have only two entities associated with the relationships, so the degree of relationship in case of two entities is 2. The next important terminology is cardinality of the relationship. So it is defined as how many occurrence of one entity are related or associated with how many or one occurrence of another entity. Next is connectivity of the relationship. It is basically the occurrence, also the occurrence of one entity related to the occurrence of other entity, and it is classified as 1 is to 1, 1 is to n is to 1, and m is to n. The next is the direction of the relationship. It is basically the line connecting two entities showing the type of the relationships. The first I will discuss about what is entity. So it is basically the real world object that exists and is also distinguishable from other objects. The objects may be a person, a place, a thing, or any kind of event, but they have a real world existence that is mainly the concept of entity. So it is maybe a physical object, or maybe a abstract object that exists and can be distinguished from other object. Suppose we have a Maruti Alto car, so it is basically a real world object, and with the registration number, suppose this one is the registration number, so it is a entity, as it is uniquely identify one particular car with the help of this particular registration number or a number plate. We can easily identify this Maruti Alto car, and it is also different from other Maruti Alto cars. So this is a unique, and this is a unique object, and it is called as entity. Next, what are the different properties of entities? So entities are always represented by a set of attributes or properties. These are called as attribute. Entity is atomic and cannot be broken down into smaller pieces. Like in the previous slide I discussed about Maruti Alto car. So Maruti Alto car is a atomic entity, and it can't be broken down or divided into small pieces, so that it is a unique and atomic entity. The next important characteristic or property is entity is instance of a entity type. So in the previous slide we have a Maruti Alto car as an entity, and it is also a instance of a entity that is called as car. Basically it is a car, and Maruti Alto is a instance of the entity car. It is an instance of the entity car. So next we have what is a entity type. So entity type is a collection of entities that have same attributes but different values. For the example, we have suppose for example, suppose we have these two have are the entities, and the first entity or first instance of the entities, we have Ram. Suppose this one is a roll number and this one is a class. BSc is a class, 5643 is a roll number. The next instance of the entity is Nikhil, 45555 and BSc. So all have the similar attributes. So these are the instances of the entity type, that is a student. Next we have some properties of entity type. The first important property is an entity is a instance of the entity type. Next important property is entity type is identified by its name and properties. So every entity type is identified by its name and property. For example, we have suppose Maruti Alto car. So Maruti Alto car is the name of that entity type, and it has some properties or attributes. Suppose color is one of the attribute, uh, type of the car is other attribute, model is also another attribute, company is also attribute. So these are the name and properties of a entity type. So the entity type is represented by ER diagram as a rectangular box enclosing the entity name. So in case of ER diagram, the entities are always represented with the help of a rectangular box. So if you see any kind of rectangular box in a ER diagram, that means that is the representation of a entity type. So entity set is a collection of all the instances of a particular entity type at any point of time in the database. So we know what is a set. Set is the collection of the elements. So entity set is the collection of all the instances of a particular entity type. So each entity set is referred as its name and attribute values. For example, we have a set of students, set of cars, set of employees in a bank. So this one is a entity set. So set is the collection of element, and entity set is a collection of all the instances of a particular entity. So suppose in this diagram the first figure shows we have a entity name student, and these are the attributes. Roll number, name and class are the attributes of this entity type, and the instances of this entity is, first instance is E1 Ramesh 2341 and BCA. The second instance is Mohan 2342 BCA. The third instance is Atul 2343 BCA. So all these are the instances, and they are collected together as they share the same entity and the properties of the entity student, and the collection of these entities instances is called as entity set. Similarly, we have a entity car, and the attributes of this entity is name, registration number. So the different instances of this car entity is Maruti Gen PB02Z 1982, so on. So these are the instances of the this car entity, and the collection of these entities instances, that is the type of entity car, is called as entity set. Next, what is attribute? So attribute is the property or the characteristic of the entities. For example, suppose we have a entity name student. So the student in a class may have the properties roll number. It has a property or a characteristic or attribute student name, student class, father name, email ID, address. All are the attributes or the characteristic of this student entity. So properties of attributes contain, so attribute of the entity should be unique. It should be uniquely identify the identity, and there should be permitted values for each attribute, that is called as domain. For example, suppose we have a roll number, and we can suppose the roll number will start from 1 and it will end up to 100, or it will go up to 100. So it is basically the set of the permitted values. So we can assign a roll number to a student in between 1 to 100, and this is called as domain of this particular attribute roll number. So domain is basically the set of permitted values that are permitted for each attribute in a domain, in a entity. Next, the attribute of the entity is represented in ER diagram as a ellipse. So to represent a attribute of a entity, it is always be shown with the help of a shape that is a elliptical in nature. So thanks for watching this video lecture. I will continue with the next lecture on ER model. Thanks.